Start with the one that sounds made up. There's a city in Texas that got so low on water, it took what people flushed down their toilets, ran it through a pipe, cleaned it, and pumped it back to the kitchen tap. On purpose. And everybody kept paying the water bill. That's not a glitch. That's what running out of options looks like. And believe it or not, that's one of the milder places on this list. Texas has been the #1 state Americans move to for years. Low taxes, warm winters, a Zillow filter set to cheapest first. Most movers do their homework. The ones who don't are the reason this list exists. No bluebonnets, no brochure, just the trade-off the listing photos leave out. 12 places counting down to the one I'd talk almost anyone out of. We start at number 12. Number 12, Wichita Falls. Start with that toilet story because it's true, and it tells you everything about North Texas at the wrong end of a dry decade. In 2014, after 3 brutal years of drought, the reservoirs feeding Wichita Falls dropped toward a quarter full and kept falling. So the city built a pipeline connecting its wastewater plant directly to its drinking water plant, what residents bluntly called toilet to tap. Officials swore the science was sound, and it was. That's not the point. The point is that a city of around 100,000 people looked at the sky, did the math, and decided drinking recycled sewage beat the alternative, which was running dry in about 2 years. Now stack the rest of it on top. The summers here are the kind that crack windshields. This is the town that hosts a 100-mile bike race called, with zero exaggeration, the Hotter in Hell 100. And in 1979, on a day locals still call Terrible Tuesday, a monster tornado tore through the city and killed dozens in minutes. So here's the honest pitch. The houses are cheap, the people are kind, and the land is wide open. You will simply pay for it in a currency that isn't dollars, in 110-degree afternoons, in storm sirens, and in the quiet knowledge that the water supply has a history. Wichita Falls isn't the most dangerous place on this list. It's the one that reminds you the environment itself can be the landlord, and it does not negotiate. But drought, at least, you can see coming. The next town can't even agree on what state it's in. And for one spring in 1946, stepping outside after dark could get you killed. Number 11. Texarkana. Here's a question most towns can't pose. What state are you standing in right now? In Texarkana, you might genuinely not know. The city sits welded onto the Texas-Arkansas line, split right down the middle of State Line Avenue. There is a federal building downtown built deliberately on top of the border, so it sits in both states at once. 2 governments, 2 sets of laws, 2 tax codes, 2 minimum wages, running through one community, sometimes through one street. Get a speeding ticket and the answer to which court depends on which lane you were in. That's the quirky part. Here's the part that put Texarkana into American folklore. In the spring of 1946, a masked attacker began hunting couples parked on the dark roads outside town. Always at night, always on weekends. Over roughly 10 weeks, he attacked 8 people and killed 5. Witnesses described a white hood with eye holes cut into it. The newspapers christened him the Phantom Killer. The town stopped going outside after dark, and the case, to this day, almost 80 years later, was never solved. It later inspired a cult horror film, and it's quietly credited as an ancestor of the entire slasher genre, a town that gave the world the original boogeyman and never caught him. The murders faded from the headlines. The thing they revealed, a place where for one long spring sundown meant locking the door, is the part that lingers. Cheap homes, deep roots, and a split personality you'll be filling out tax forms about for the rest of your life. And at least Texarkana keeps its horrors in the past tense. The next town's biggest employer is in the business of nuclear weapons. Right now, today. Number 10, Amarillo. Amarillo's first problem is simple geography. It is gloriously, punishingly far from everywhere. Up in the Panhandle, the nearest big city in your own state is several hours of flat, empty interstate away. You're closer to 4 other state capitals than to Austin. When people say the middle of nowhere, this is roughly the GPS coordinate they mean. But isolation isn't the headline. This is. 17 miles outside town sits Pantex, the only facility in the United States that assembles and takes apart nuclear weapons. Thousands of warheads have been built and dismantled out here on the high plains, and the plant quietly stores plutonium cores in interim holding. With over 4,600 employees, it's the largest employer in the entire Panhandle, which means the regional economy doesn't run on cattle or oil out here so much as on the maintenance of America's nuclear arsenal. Locals don't whisper about it. They nicknamed the place Bomb City and put it on t-shirts. On top of that, Amarillo carries a violent violent crime rate running roughly double the national average, with a murder count that spiked uncomfortably in the early 2020s before easing back. Add brutal winters, dust storms, and a downtown that's been fighting for its life for decades. You can buy a lot of house for your money here. The catch is that your biggest neighbor handles thermonuclear devices for a living, and the second nearest emergency room of any size is a road trip. Amarillo will give you space. It just won't give you much of anything to put in it. Still, isolation you can plan around. You can't plan around a town where the people running it get hauled off in handcuffs all at once, which is exactly what happened in the next one. Number 9. Crystal City. This one is almost funny. Almost. Crystal City is a small town southwest of San Antonio that calls itself the spinach capital of the world. There is, I promise you, a statue of Popeye standing in the middle of it. For most of its life, that statue was the most interesting thing in town. Then came February 2016. In a single sweep, federal agents arrested almost the entire town government, the mayor, the city manager, the mayor pro tem, a sitting councilman, and a former one, charged with taking bribes and kickbacks and with sending city workers to prop up an illegal gambling operation run by a man known only as Mr. T. When the dust settled, exactly one city councilman was not facing federal charges, and a separate councilman was already under indictment for human smuggling. It got better. The mayor was hauled out of a city council meeting in handcuffs, on camera, while a crowd cheered. A major newspaper flat out called it the most corrupt little town in America. The city manager would eventually be sentenced to 35 years, and underneath the circus, the town was broke, flirting with bankruptcy, and at one point dealing with water residents were told not to drink. A town of about 7,000 people that managed to lose nearly its entire leadership to a federal indictment in one morning is telling you something about how it's run. Cheap is cheap for a reason. Sometimes the reason is that the people in charge were busy. But corruption at least sits still long enough to vote out. The next town's entire economy can vanish between a Tuesday and a Wednesday, and take your job with it. Number 8. Pecos. Drive into Pecos during an oil boom, and the first thing you notice is the trucks. Endless lines of them. Sand, water, fracking rigs, 18-wheelers, grinding through the middle of town because there's no bypass and never was. Pecos sits on the western edge of the Permian Basin, the most productive oil field in the country, and when crude is high, this sleepy desert town of maybe 12,000 people doubles in size almost overnight as workers pour in. Where do they live? Man camps. Rows of pop-up trailers and portable motel rooms where rig hands sleep in shifts, one guy clocking out as the next clocks in. Workers routinely run 100-hour weeks, and the money is real. Rents in the Permian have spiked higher than Austin, Dallas, or Houston, with a one-bedroom going for prices that make no sense in the middle of the Chihuahuan desert. The road out of town toward New Mexico has earned a nickname locals say without smiling, the Death Highway. So many overloaded trucks, so many exhausted drivers, that fatal wrecks in the oil boom counties climbed at a rate that dwarfed the rest of the state. And then comes the other half of the word boom. In 2020, a price war and a pandemic crushed oil overnight. Crews got cut, half-built projects froze. The town that had just put $100 million toward a new hospital was suddenly staring at the bust it always knew was coming. Would you take a six-figure oil field job knowing the whole thing can evaporate when OPEC has a bad meeting? Every cycle, plenty of people say yes. Every cycle, some of them are still here when the music stops. Quick thing before we keep going. If this is saving you a mistake, hit like. It's the only reason the algorithm shows it to the next person who's one accepted offer away from regret. And stick around because the next 5 only get heavier. Number 7 has lived through some of the worst mass shootings in American history. Number 5 just pretends to be a wholesome college town. Back to it. Number 7. Killeen. Killeen exists because of Fort Cavazos, the giant army post next door, formerly Fort Hood, one of the largest military installations on the planet. That's not a feature of the local economy, it is the local economy. Soldiers, contractors, military families, and everything built to serve them. When the base thrives, Killeen thrives. When Washington reshuffles deployments or talks budget cuts, the whole town holds its breath. But Killeen carries something heavier than economic dependence, and it's worth saying plainly because it's a sensitive subject. This town has lived through some of the deadliest mass shootings in American history. In 1991, a man drove his truck through the window of a Luby's cafeteria at lunchtime and opened fire, killing 23 people. At the time, the worst mass shooting the country had ever seen. 18 years later, the post next door endured another horrific attack. A town this size carrying that much grief is not an accident of bad luck. It's a weight the community has had to learn to carry. For a mover, the calculus is this: the housing is affordable and turns over fast because military families are always cycling in and out, which also means a transient town where it's hard to put down roots. Schools strain under constant churn, and your home's value rides on decisions made in the Pentagon. You're not buying into a community so much as into a posting. Killeen is built on service and sacrifice. It's just a hard place to build a life that stays still. We're past halfway now, and here's the honest truth. Everything from this point down is a place I'd actively talk a friend out of. Starting with one where the danger isn't history and isn't a statistic, it's live, on the news, with razor wire strung across the spot where Main Street begins. Number 6. Eagle Pass. Most towns dread becoming a national news story. Eagle Pass became a geopolitical one. This is a quiet border city of about 30,000 on the Rio Grande. For most of its history, almost nobody outside South Texas could find it on a map. Then it landed at the dead center of America's fight over the border. In January 2024, the Texas National Guard took control of Shelby Park, a 47-acre stretch of public parkland where the town's Main Street basically begins, and locked it down. Razor wire along the river, walls built out of stacked shipping containers, buoys strung across the water, soldiers stationed where families used to picnic. I'm going to stay out of the politics because the politics is its own war, and you came here for the lived experience. So here it is. Imagine your kid's park is now a staging ground for thousands of troops. The riverbank near your house is wrapped in concertina wire, and the legal fight over your hometown is being argued in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. National Guard members from a dozen other states rotated through. Governors held press conferences in your front yard. Crossings in this sector have since dropped sharply. By most counts, a steep decline. But the militarized landscape didn't pack up and leave with the cameras. The state started building a base for thousands of troops. When your town stops being a place to live and becomes a symbol other people argue about, daily life gets strange in ways no cost of living calculator will ever capture. Cheap homes, yes. A normal life? That's the part that's not on the table right now. But that's a danger you can at least see from across the river. The next one hides behind a college town smile. Number 5. Lubbock. On paper, Lubbock should be a layup. It's a real city, around 265,000 people, anchored by Texas Tech, full of churches, decent jobs, and that wholesome West Texas reputation. People move here for the university and the affordability, and assume college town means safe. Check the FBI data and that wholesome picture falls apart fast. For years, Lubbock has been one of the most dangerous cities in Texas, at times the single most dangerous in the state. Here's the one number to hold on to. In a given year, your odds of being a violent crime victim here run about 1 in 122. Statewide, it's closer to 1 in 257. Same Texas, less than half the safety. Now, the city has earned some real credit lately. Crime has been falling, with one of the biggest multi-year drops of any major Texas jurisdiction. That's genuine progress. But improving and low are not the same word, and a rate this high doesn't become gentle just because the trend line points down. Then there's the geography. Lubbock sits out on the South Plains, hours from the nearest comparably sized city, ringed by flat cotton country and not much else. So you get the crime profile of a big city with the isolation of a small one, the worst trade in both directions. The hub city nickname comes from all the highways that meet here. The thing about a hub is that it's a place everyone passes through. Whether you want to be a permanent resident of one is a different question. But Lubbock, for all its problems, wants you alive. The next town is organized, top to bottom, around the opposite. Number 4. Huntsville. Every town has a main industry. In Huntsville, the main industry is death. This is a city of around 40,000, an hour north of Houston, and it's home to 7 state prisons, more than 13,000 inmates, and the headquarters of the entire Texas prison system. That alone makes it a company town, but one building makes it something else. The Huntsville Unit. Locals call it the Walls Unit, for the 15-foot red brick walls, holds the busiest execution chamber in the United States. Since Texas brought back the death penalty in 1982, roughly 600 people have been put to death inside it. Researchers and journalists have called Huntsville the death penalty capital of America, and some say the world. Sit with what that does to a town. The largest employer locks people up, and in one building ends lives by law. The whole rhythm of the place, the housing, the jobs, the schools, the bus that arrives in the early afternoon carrying a man on his last day, flows downstream from that one fact. packed. And then there's the gift shop. The Texas Prison Museum, right off the interstate, displays the old electric chair, nicknamed Old Sparky, built by inmates, used on hundreds of men before lethal injection took over. A town that turned its execution history into a roadside attraction with a register and a parking lot has made a kind of peace with its identity, and that peace tells you exactly what you'd be moving into. The college keeps it from feeling like a movie set. But you don't get to live here and not know what the town is for. At least Huntsville is honest about what it is. The next city spent 100 years pretending to be something it stopped being a long time ago. Number 3, Beaumont. Here's the only number you need. In Beaumont, your odds of being a violent crime victim in a single year are about 1 in 88, against 1 in 257 across Texas as a whole. That lands a city of barely 110,000 people among the most dangerous in the entire state year after year. Crime has dipped lately, and that's real, but less catastrophic is a long way from safe. Now here's the part that turns a crime stat into a tragedy. On January 10th, 1901, just outside Beaumont, a drill struck oil at a hill called Spindletop, and the gusher blew over 100 feet into the air. That single well launched the modern petroleum industry. It minted fortunes, built companies whose names you'd recognize instantly, and helped power the American century. And the town where it all started, it became one of the poorest and most violent cities in Texas. That's the whole story of Beaumont in one cruel line. The wealth was born here, and the wealth left here, and what stayed behind was a corridor of the Gulf Coast. Locals call it the Golden Triangle, where the gold is long gone and the triangle remains. There's a monument to Spindletop, a short drive from neighborhoods the police describe in language a tourism board would never print. The oil that changed the world erupted out of this ground. History doesn't owe loyalty to the places that make it. 2 left, and these are the 2 I'd circle in red on anyone's moving plan. Subscribe so the next person gets the honest version, because the finale is the big one. A city that floods no matter how high you build, and an island where 8,000 people already died trying to live there. Number 2. Houston. This one's different, and I want to be fair about it. Houston is the 4th largest city in America, a genuine economic giant, one of the most diverse and energetic places in the country, and millions of people love living here for very good reasons. Most lists like this would never touch it. That's exactly why it's at number 2, because the thing that can ruin you here is the thing the recruiters and relocation packages will never put in bold. Houston floods. Not occasionally, structurally. It's nicknamed the Bayou City because it was built on a flat, swampy coastal plain that drains terribly, and then it grew with almost no zoning and a build-anywhere philosophy that paved over the very ground that used to soak up the rain. The result? The region got hit with 3 separate 500-year floods in 3 straight years. In 2017, Hurricane Harvey parked over the city and dumped up to 4 feet of rain in a few days, drowning neighborhoods that had never flooded before, killing dozens and causing well over $100 billion in damage. Studies later found the city's own sprawl made the flooding dramatically worse. Parts of the metro are literally sinking, which makes the next flood worse than the last. And here's the trap that closes on movers specifically. Most homes here don't carry flood insurance. At one point, only a small fraction of Harris County homes did, because plenty of these houses aren't in an official flood zone right up until the day they're underwater. Developers keep building in floodplains. Disclosure rules have holes you could float a boat through. So you buy the affordable house, you skip the flood policy nobody told you needed, and you're one stalled storm away from watching your single biggest investment turn into a total loss with no payout. The job market is real. The culture is real. But every few years, the water comes to collect, and the people it ruins are almost never the ones who could afford to lose. Buy here with your eyes wide open, or don't buy here at all. And if a quiet barrier island sounds safer than a flood-prone megacity, wait until you hear what the Gulf did to the one an hour south. Number 1. Galveston, and where Texas got its hardest lesson and then moved back in anyway. Galveston is a beach town on a barrier island an hour south of Houston, and on a good day it is genuinely lovely. The historic Strand, the seawall, the old amusement pier hanging out over the Gulf. The tourism photos do not lie about the sunsets, they just leave out the graveyard underneath them. On September 8th, 1900, a hurricane that nobody saw coming slammed into Galveston with a 15-foot storm surge that rolled clear across the island. There was no warning system worth the name. The water swept entire neighborhoods off their foundations. When it was over, somewhere between 6,000 and 12,000 people were dead. Not in Texas history, in all of American history. It remains the deadliest natural disaster this country has ever recorded. An entire city drowned in a single night. Here's the part that should stop you cold. Galveston had been the largest, richest city in Texas, on track to be the great metropolis of the state. After the storm, the survivors made a choice. They built a seawall, they jacked the entire city up several feet on fill, and then, instead of moving inland to safe ground, they rebuilt right there, on the same sandbar, in the same path, and their descendants are still there today.